Have you ever stood in front of a mirror late at night and felt something watching you back? Something that wasn't quite your reflection but something else entirely? Something ancient and hungry? I remember the first time it happened to me. I was alone in my bathroom at 3 in the morning, exhausted from another sleepless night of spiritual searching, my eyes burning from reading forbidden texts that the church had tried to erase from history. When I looked up into that mirror for just a fraction of a second, I saw my reflection smile at me even though my face was completely still. My blood went cold, my heart stopped, and in that moment of pure terror, something inside me cracked open, and I understood with absolute certainty that I had been lied to my entire life about the nature of reality itself. What I discovered in the months that followed, buried deep in the suppressed gospels found at Nag Hammadi, would shatter everything you think you know about mirrors, about consciousness, about the very fabric of this prison we call physical reality. Jesus himself warned his closest disciples about mirrors, calling them portals, gateways that the Archons use to feed on human consciousness and keep our divine spark trapped in the material world. This knowledge was deliberately hidden from you, burned by the early church councils, suppressed by those who benefit from your spiritual blindness. But today, right now, I'm going to reveal exactly what Jesus taught about mirrors, why the Archons designed them as feeding stations for human energy, and most importantly, how you can use this forbidden knowledge to stop giving your power away every single time you look at your own reflection. Before I reveal this suppressed Gnostic teaching that could transform your entire understanding of reality, I need you to know something. If you're a sincere seeker of hidden truth, if you're tired of the spiritual lies that organized religion has fed you since childhood, if you're ready to finally understand the invisible prison that surrounds us all, then subscribe to this channel right now and activate the notification bell. What I'm about to share with you comes from ancient manuscripts that were buried in the Egyptian desert for over 1500 years, because the Orthodox Church knew this knowledge would set people free, and they couldn't allow that. I don't want you to miss the profound revelations I share each week about the suppressed Gnostic teachings, the hidden wisdom of the mystery schools, and the techniques that mystics throughout history have used to escape the Archon control system. Subscribe now because you're about to learn something that will change the way you see yourself, literally every single day for the rest of your life. Now let me tell you exactly what you're going to discover in the next several minutes. You're going to learn the shocking truth about what mirrors actually are according to the secret teachings Jesus gave to his inner circle of Gnostic disciples. You're going to understand the precise mechanism by which Archons use reflective surfaces as portals to drain your divine energy and reinforce the illusion of separation that keeps you imprisoned in matter. You're going to hear the exact passages from the Gospel of Philip and the secret book of John that describe this mirror technology and why it was designed by the demiurge, the false god of this world, to keep you identified with your physical body instead of remembering your true nature as an eternal being of light. And most importantly, you're going to learn practical techniques to protect yourself, to use mirrors consciously instead of unconsciously, and to turn these Archon portals into tools for your own awakening rather than instruments of your continued enslavement. This isn't theory or speculation. This is suppressed knowledge that Gnostic initiates throughout history have guarded carefully, passing it only to those who were ready to handle the responsibility of seeing through the veil of material reality. Let me take you back to the 4th century in Egypt, to a moment that would change the course of spiritual history forever. 2 brothers, farmers working the land near the town of Nag Hammadi, were digging for fertilizer when their shovels struck something hard buried in the sand. They pulled out a large sealed jar, and when they broke it open, they found 13 ancient leather-bound books, codices that had been hidden there since approximately 390 AD, when the Christian emperor Theodosius ordered all non-Orthodox religious texts to be destroyed. The monks at the nearby Pachomian monastery, knowing that these precious Gnostic scriptures would be burned by the authorities, had sealed them in that jar and buried them, hoping that one day, when the world was ready, someone would find them again. And inside those codices were gospels, teachings, and revelations that the church had spent centuries trying to erase from human memory. Among them was the Gospel of Philip, a text that contains some of the most profound and disturbing teachings about the nature of reality that Jesus ever gave. And in that gospel, there's a passage about mirrors that most people read right past without understanding its explosive implications. Philip quotes Jesus as saying that those who are trapped in the material world cannot see themselves as they truly are. They can only see images, reflections, shadows cast by the light of the divine that has been distorted through the lens of matter. Jesus explains that when you look in a mirror, you are not seeing yourself, you are seeing the Archon's interpretation of you, the limited material construct they want you to believe you are so that you forget your true divine nature. The Archons, as the Gnostic texts describe them, are non-physical entities, intermediary beings that serve the demiurge, the false god who created the material universe as a prison for divine consciousness. These beings don't have the divine spark that you have trapped inside your body. They're empty, hungry, desperate entities that can only sustain themselves by feeding on the light and energy of beings who do contain that spark, beings like you. And according to Jesus in the suppressed texts, they designed this entire physical reality as a farm, a feeding ground where they can harvest human consciousness and keep souls recycling through incarnation after incarnation, never remembering who they truly are, never escaping the wheel of birth and death and suffering. Mirrors, Jesus taught, are one of their most ingenious inventions. Every time you look in a mirror, you reinforce the identification with your physical form. You see yourself as a body, as a separate individual, as someone trapped in time and space and matter. This identification with the reflection is exactly what the Archons want, because as long as you believe you are this limited physical being, you'll never access the divine knowledge, the Gnosis, that would set you free. The mirror shows you the shadow and trains you to forget the light that casts it. Let me pause here and ask you something that very few people have the courage to answer honestly. Have you ever felt that you don't truly belong in this world? That something is fundamentally wrong with the reality everyone else seems to accept as normal? As if your soul remembers something your conscious mind has forgotten. That feeling of being a stranger in a strange land, of seeking answers that no one around you even seems to question, is the first whisper of Gnosis awakening within you. If right now you recognize that you've always carried this deep spiritual restlessness, this thirst for hidden truths, I want you to do something powerful. Write in the comments right now the phrase, "I awaken from the sleep of ignorance." Don't underestimate the power of this public declaration. When you state that you're awakening, that you no longer accept the imposed illusions, something fundamental shifts in your consciousness. And beyond that, when you comment, you're helping the algorithm bring this Gnostic knowledge to other sincere seekers who at this very moment are wandering lost, searching for the same truths you're discovering. Don't keep this knowledge to yourself. Right now, I awaken from the sleep of ignorance, and let your declaration serve as a beacon for other pilgrims on the Gnostic path. Now let me reveal what Jesus actually taught his disciples about the mechanism of mirror consciousness and why understanding this could be the key to your liberation. In the secret book of John, another text from Nag Hammadi, there's a detailed cosmology that explains how the Archons function and how they keep human souls trapped. The text describes how the chief Archon, Yaldabaoth, who is the demiurge, the false god of this material world, created the physical universe as a distorted copy of the true divine realm, the pleroma, where your consciousness actually originates. Everything in this material world is an inverted reflection of divine truth. Light becomes darkness, freedom becomes slavery, Gnosis becomes ignorance, love becomes fear. And the Archon's greatest trick was convincing you that this inverted world is real, that the reflection is the original, that the shadow is the substance. Mirrors in the physical world serve as perfect metaphors and actual tools for this inverted consciousness. When you look in a mirror, you're not seeing what's actually there. You're seeing light reflected backward, inverted, reversed. Your right side appears as your left side. What is close appears distant. What is three-dimensional appears flat. The mirror creates an illusion of depth that doesn't actually exist. And this is precisely how the Archons want you to see reality itself: backward, inverted, illusory. But here's what's even more disturbing. According to the Gnostic teachings that Jesus shared, mirrors don't just reflect light. They can actually trap consciousness. In several mystery traditions that preserve the Gnostic wisdom, initiates were warned never to place mirrors in certain positions, never to look into them during specific times, and never to allow themselves to become hypnotized by their own reflection. Why? Because the Archons can use mirrors as literal portals, gateways through which they can observe you, attach themselves to your energy field, and in some cases even create thought forms and attachments that will follow you after you look away. Have you ever had the experience of looking in a mirror for too long and suddenly feeling disconnected from yourself, as if you're looking at a stranger, as if the person in the reflection isn't quite you anymore? That dissociation is actually a moment when the Archon influence is strongest, when they're able to pull your consciousness into identification with the material form and away from your awareness of your true divine nature. Jesus taught that every time you look in a mirror without conscious awareness, you're performing a ritual of self-imprisonment. You're looking at your physical body, your temporary vehicle, and you're saying, yes, this is who I am, this limited form, this aging flesh, this separate individual. And with each unconscious glance, you're strengthening the chains that bind your divine spark to matter. The Archons feed on this energy of self-limitation. When you look at yourself and think, I'm too old, I'm not attractive enough, I'm not successful enough, I'm just this limited human being, you're generating exactly the frequency of consciousness that the Archons consume. They don't want you to look in the mirror and remember that you're an eternal being of divine light, temporarily inhabiting a physical form. They want you to look in the mirror and feel inadequate, separate, trapped, limited. That emotional energy is their food. Now I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds paranoid. This sounds like conspiracy theory. Mirrors are just mirrors, right? They're just pieces of glass that reflect light. How could they possibly be Archon portals? But consider this. The technology of mirrors, true flat polished mirrors that create clear reflections, only became widespread in human society a few hundred years ago. Before that, for most of human history, people rarely saw their own faces clearly. They might catch glimpses in still water or polished metal, but the obsession with self-image, with checking your appearance constantly, with the selfie culture we have today, none of that was possible until mirrors became common. And look at what's happened to human consciousness as mirrors proliferated. We've become more narcissistic, more self-obsessed, more identified with physical appearance, more trapped in the material world than ever before in recorded history. The rise of mirror technology corresponds exactly with the decline of mystical awareness and the rise of materialistic consciousness. That's not a coincidence. That's precisely what the Archons intended. The Gospel of Thomas, another suppressed text that contains Jesus' actual teachings, has a saying that most scholars completely misinterpret. Jesus says when you make the two into one, when you make the inner like the outer and the outer like the inner, when you make the male and the female into a single one so that the male will not be male nor the female be female, when you make eyes in place of an eye and a hand in place of a hand and a foot in place of a foot and an image in place of an image, then you will enter the kingdom. Most people read that and think Jesus is speaking in riddles. But when you understand the Gnostic context, when you understand what he's teaching about mirrors and reflected consciousness, the meaning becomes crystal clear. He's describing the process of transcending duality, of moving beyond the reflected world of opposites and illusions into direct gnosis of the undivided divine reality. When you make an image in place of an image, you're recognizing that what you see in the mirror is not the real you. It's an image of an image, a reflection of a reflection, a shadow of the divine light that you truly are. And when you finally see through that illusion, when you stop identifying with the reflection, then you enter the kingdom, you return to the pleroma, you escape the Archon prison. Let me share with you what happened to a seeker named Marcus who started applying these teachings consciously. Marcus had been on a spiritual path for years, reading everything he could find, practicing meditation, attending workshops, but he always felt like something was missing, like he was going in circles, never quite breaking through to real awakening. Then he discovered the Nag Hammadi texts and Jesus' teachings about mirrors and the Archons. He decided to conduct an experiment. For 30 days, he committed to never looking in a mirror unconsciously. Every single time he had to look at his reflection, whether to shave, to check his appearance, to brush his teeth, anything, he would first pause, take 3 deep breaths, and consciously state, "I am not this body. I am divine consciousness temporarily experiencing physical form. I reclaim my power from the Archon illusion." It seemed like a simple practice, almost too simple to matter. But what happened to Marcus over those 30 days was profound beyond anything he expected. In the first week, he started noticing how often he had been looking at himself unconsciously, dozens of times per day, in mirrors, in reflective surfaces, in his phone screen, constantly checking his appearance, constantly reinforcing his identification with his physical form. By the second week, something started shifting in his perception. When he looked in the mirror with conscious awareness, he started seeing more than just his physical features. He started perceiving the light behind his eyes, the consciousness that was looking through those eyes, the eternal awareness that wasn't bound by the form in the reflection. By the third week, he had several spontaneous experiences of gnosis, moments where he could feel his consciousness expanding beyond the limits of his body, where he could sense the divine spark within him connecting to the infinite source of all consciousness. And by the end of the 30 days, Marcus reported that his entire relationship with reality had transformed. He no longer felt trapped in his body. He no longer felt separate from the divine. He could look in the mirror and see both the temporary physical form and the eternal light that animated it simultaneously, without losing himself in either extreme. The transformation Marcus experienced isn't unique. Seekers who practice conscious mirror awareness consistently report similar breakthroughs. One woman named Sarah described how she had struggled with body dysmorphia and self-hatred for decades, constantly looking in mirrors and seeing only flaws, only inadequacy, only reasons to feel bad about herself. When she learned about the Archon mirror portal teaching and started applying the practice of conscious awareness, everything changed. She realized that the voice in her head criticizing her appearance wasn't her voice at all. It was an Archon thought form that had attached itself to her every time she looked in the mirror unconsciously. By bringing conscious awareness to the act of looking at her reflection, by remembering her true divine nature, she was able to break that attachment. Within weeks, the self-hatred dissolved. Not because her physical appearance changed, but because she stopped identifying with it as the totality of who she was. She could look in the mirror and feel compassion for the temporary physical vehicle she inhabited while simultaneously knowing herself as eternal consciousness. Another seeker named David reported something even more striking. He had been practicing mirror awareness for about 2 months when one night he had a lucid dream where he found himself standing in a room full of mirrors. In the dream, he remembered the teaching about Archon portals, and he consciously chose not to look at any of the reflections. Instead, he turned his awareness inward, focusing on the light of consciousness itself rather than any reflected image. As soon as he did this, the mirrors in the dream began to crack and shatter, and behind them he saw the faces of the Archons, the entities that had been using those portals to feed on his energy. They looked desperate, hungry, angry that he had discovered their trick. And then David woke up with the most profound sense of freedom he had ever experienced. He knew without doubt that he had broken an energetic agreement, an unconscious contract that had been binding him to the material world and allowing these entities to drain his divine light. Now here's the practical application of this knowledge that you can start using immediately. Every time you approach a mirror from this moment forward, treat it as a spiritual practice, as an opportunity to reclaim your power rather than give it away. Before you look at your reflection, take a breath and center yourself in the awareness of who you truly are. Not the body you're about to see reflected, but the eternal consciousness that is looking through those eyes. As you look at your reflection, consciously state either out loud or in your mind, I am not this form. I am the light that animates this form. I reclaim my divine power from all Archon illusions. See if you can perceive not just the physical features in the reflection, but the consciousness behind them, the awareness that is witnessing the reflection. Make this a meditation, not a rushed unconscious habit. Spend just 30 seconds truly being present with your own consciousness while looking at your reflected form, and notice what shifts in your perception. This practice becomes even more powerful when you combine it with the Gnostic understanding of the divine names. In the Pistis Sophia, another crucial Gnostic text, Jesus teaches his disciples the names and invocations of the powers of light that can protect consciousness from Archon interference. When you invoke these divine names while looking in the mirror, you're not just protecting yourself, you're actually transforming the mirror from an Archon portal into a gateway for divine light to enter the material world through your conscious awareness. The names Jesus taught included invocations to Sophia, the divine wisdom, asking her to restore the memory of your true origin in the pleroma. You can speak to your reflection, I am Sophia's child. I remember my divine origin. I cannot be bound by material illusion. These aren't just empty words, they're vibrational statements that reprogram your consciousness and create a protective field around your energy body that the Archons cannot penetrate. If this knowledge is already expanding your consciousness, if you feel that you've finally found a trustworthy guide on this Gnostic journey, leave your like now so that more seekers can discover these hidden teachings. And understand that what I'm sharing with you is just the beginning. There are layers upon layers of suppressed wisdom about how the Archons have engineered this reality to keep you asleep, and I'm committed to revealing all of it to you, piece by piece, week after week, as your consciousness becomes ready to integrate it. Let me go deeper into what Jesus taught about the nature of reflection itself and why it matters so much for your liberation. In the Gospel of Truth, another Nag Hammadi text, there's a teaching about how error, which is what the Gnostics called the state of ignorance and separation from divine truth, came into existence through a kind of fog or mist that distorted the clear light of the pleroma. This fog created shadows, reflections, imitations of the true divine reality. And these reflections became so convincing that consciousness forgot they were reflections and started believing they were the original truth. The material world, according to this teaching, is exactly that. It's a reflected shadow world, a distorted copy of divine reality. And the Demiurge and his Archons rule this reflected realm precisely because they themselves are reflections, copies without originals, forms without substance. They have no divine spark of their own, so they must feed on yours. And mirrors in the physical world are microcosms of this larger cosmic truth. Every mirror is a small replica of how the entire material universe functions, taking divine light and reflecting it backward, inverting it, trapping consciousness in fascination with the image rather than awakening to the source of light itself. Jesus taught that liberation comes through gnosis, through direct experiential knowledge that you are not the reflection but the light that creates the reflection. When you truly understand this, not just intellectually but in the core of your being, the power that the Archons have over you dissolves instantly. They can only control you when you're identified with the material form, when you believe you are the body, when you think the reflection in the mirror is the real you. But the moment you remember, the moment the gnosis awakens and you know yourself as eternal divine consciousness, you become untouchable. The Archons can't feed on awakened consciousness because awakened consciousness doesn't generate the frequency of fear, limitation, and separation that they consume. You become invisible to them, not in a physical sense, but in an energetic sense. They can no longer hook into your energy field because you're no longer broadcasting the signal of a sleeping slave. This is why the early church was so terrified of Gnostic teachings. If people actually understood that they were divine beings temporarily inhabiting physical forms, if they knew they could access direct knowledge of God without any priestly intermediary, if they realized that the material world was a prison created by a false god, and that liberation was possible through gnosis, the entire control structure would collapse. The church needed people to believe they were sinful, limited, fallen beings who could only be saved through the external authority of the institution. The Gnostics were teaching the opposite, that salvation comes from within, through awakening to your true nature, through gnosis that liberates you from the Archon control system. So the church hunted down the Gnostics, burned their texts, killed their teachers, and created a version of Christianity that would keep people spiritually enslaved rather than liberated. The mirror teaching is just one example of the profound wisdom that was suppressed. Another crucial element that Jesus taught about mirrors involves the concept of the dweller on the threshold, an entity that Gnostic initiates throughout history have encountered in their practices. When you begin to truly wake up, when you start to see through the Archon illusions and remember your divine nature, you often encounter resistance. This resistance can manifest as fear, as doubt, as intrusive thoughts trying to pull you back into identification with the material world. The dweller on the threshold is an Archon thought form that lives in the space between sleeping consciousness and awakened consciousness, and it uses mirrors and reflections as one of its primary tools to keep you trapped on the sleeping side. Many seekers have reported experiences of looking in mirrors during their awakening process and seeing their reflection shift, seeing momentary flashes of something other than their own face looking back at them, seeing darkness or distortion in their reflected eyes. This isn't insanity, it's not hallucination. It's actually your awakening consciousness beginning to perceive the Archon presence that has been there all along, feeding through the mirror portal every time you looked unconsciously. The way to move past the dweller on the threshold is not through fear but through gnosis. When you encounter these disturbing mirror experiences, instead of running away in terror, you stand firm in the awareness of your divine nature. You look at whatever appears in that reflection and you consciously state, "You have no power over me. I am eternal consciousness. I am a child of the true light. I remember who I am, and I command you to depart in the name of Sophia and the powers of the pleroma." This isn't religious superstition, it's spiritual technology. You're using the power of conscious will combined with invocation of divine authority to sever the energetic cords that the Archons have attached to you through unconscious mirror use. Seekers who have done this report immediate shifts in their energy, feeling lighter, clearer, more present, more free. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because next week I'm going to reveal the suppressed teachings about how the Archons use technology, especially screens and digital mirrors, to create even more powerful feeding portals in modern times. The wisdom I share in each video has helped thousands of sincere seekers break free from spiritual slavery, and I want to continue being your guide and friend on this path of liberation. This channel exists for you, so you never have to feel alone in your search for true gnosis. Subscribe now and activate notifications so that every time I reveal a new teaching from the Nag Hammadi texts, a new piece of suppressed hermetic wisdom, or a new mystical revelation that the Orthodox Church tried to hide, you'll be the first to receive it. Let me walk beside you as your mentor and intimate friend on this journey of awakening. Now let's talk about the most practical and immediate way you can reclaim your power from the mirror portal system starting today. Beyond the awareness practice I already shared, there's a specific Gnostic technique that comes from the Valentinian tradition, one of the most sophisticated Gnostic schools that preserve Jesus' inner circle teachings. The Valentinians taught that every human being contains multiple levels of consciousness, and that the key to liberation is activating the pneumatic level, the spiritual consciousness that remembers its divine origin. One of their practices for activating pneumatic awareness involved what they called the rite of the bridal chamber. But one aspect of this rite that's rarely discussed involved mirrors. Initiates would sit in front of a mirror in a darkened room lit only by a single candle, and they would gaze into their own eyes reflected in the mirror while repeating a specific invocation. The invocation went something like this: "I call forth the light of Christ consciousness within me. I call forth the remembrance of my true nature as a being of eternal light. I dissolve all identification with this temporary form. I remember that I am the bride of the divine, united forever with the source of all consciousness." As the initiate gazed into their own reflected eyes and repeated this invocation, something remarkable would begin to happen. The reflected face would start to shift and change, not in a frightening way, but in a way that revealed the deeper truth. The face would age, showing the initiate what they would look like in old age. Then it would grow younger, showing them as a child, as an infant. Then the face would shift further, showing them past life forms, other bodies they had inhabited in previous incarnations. And finally, if the initiate maintained their center and their conscious awareness, the face would dissolve entirely, and they would see pure light looking back at them from the mirror, the light of consciousness itself, unbound by any physical form. This practice is intense and should only be undertaken by sincere seekers who have prepared themselves through preliminary practices of meditation and grounding. But even a modified version of it can be powerful. Try this. Once per day, preferably in the evening when your conscious mind is quieter, sit in front of a mirror in low light. Look into your own reflected eyes, not at your face, not at your features, but directly into the eyes, into the windows of consciousness. As you gaze, breathe slowly and consciously, and with each exhale, mentally release identification with the physical form you're seeing. With each inhale, breathe in the awareness of your true nature as divine consciousness. Do this for just 5 minutes per day, and within a week, you'll start noticing shifts in how you perceive yourself and reality. The mirror will begin to transform from an Archon portal that drains your energy into a tool for Gnosis that awakens your remembrance. Here's what a seeker named Elena experienced when she committed to this practice. Elena had been struggling with anxiety and depression for years, feeling trapped in her life, trapped in her body, trapped in circumstances that seemed hopeless. She had tried therapy, medication, self-help programs, but nothing created lasting change. Then she found the Gnostic teachings and started practicing conscious mirror work. For the first few days she felt resistance. Her mind would wander, she would judge her appearance, she would feel silly sitting there staring at herself. But she persisted. By day 5, something shifted. As she gazed into her own eyes, she suddenly had a flash of memory, not from this lifetime but from a previous incarnation. She saw herself as a woman in ancient Egypt, and in that memory she was a priestess who knew these teachings, who had practiced conscious mirror work as part of her initiation into the mysteries. The memory was so vivid, so real that Elena started crying, not from sadness but from recognition. She realized that her soul had been seeking this knowledge across multiple lifetimes, and that finally, in this incarnation, she had found it again. From that moment, her depression began to lift. Not immediately, not magically, but progressively, as she continued the practice and continued to remember who she truly was beyond the temporary circumstances of this one lifetime. The power of this practice is that it reverses the normal function of the mirror. Instead of looking at the mirror and identifying more deeply with your physical form, you use the mirror as a portal to look beyond form entirely, to access the consciousness that witnesses all forms but is not bound by any of them. This is the secret that Jesus was teaching his disciples when he spoke about mirrors and reflections. He wasn't speaking symbolically or metaphorically, he was giving practical instructions for liberation, for Gnosis, for awakening from the sleep of material identification. And here's something else that Jesus taught that will blow your mind when you really understand it. In the Gospel of Philip, he says that those who are in the light cannot be seen by those who are in darkness, and those who are in darkness cannot be seen by those who are in the light. This seems like a simple statement about spiritual perception, but it's actually a teaching about frequency and vibration. When you're identified with material consciousness, when you're trapped in the Archon frequency, you literally cannot perceive the higher realms of divine reality. They're not hidden from you, you're vibrating at a frequency where they're invisible. But when you awaken, when you activate Gnosis and remember your true nature, you shift to a frequency where the divine realms become visible, and the Archon illusions lose their power over you. Mirrors operate on this same principle. When you look in a mirror while vibrating at the Archon frequency of fear, limitation, and material identification, the mirror reinforces that frequency, and the Archons can use it to feed on you. But when you look in a mirror while vibrating at the frequency of Gnosis, of divine remembrance, of conscious awareness, the mirror becomes a threshold to higher perception, and the Archons cannot touch you through it. This is why the practice is so important. You're not just protecting yourself from negative entities, you're actually training your consciousness to vibrate at a frequency that makes you invisible to the Archon control system. You're reclaiming sovereignty over your own energy field, over your own divine spark, and you're severing the energetic agreements that have kept you recycling through incarnation in this material prison. Every time you look in a mirror with conscious awareness, you're performing an act of rebellion against the Demiurge and his Archons. You're saying, I remember who I am. I will not be bound by your illusions. I reclaim my freedom as a divine being. Now let me address something that some of you might be wondering. If mirrors are Archon portals, should we just avoid them entirely? Should we remove all mirrors from our homes and never look at our reflections? That's one approach, and some extreme ascetic traditions have taken it, but Jesus taught a middle way. He didn't say to reject the material world entirely. He said to be in the world, but not of the world. You can use mirrors. You need to use mirrors for practical purposes, but the key is to never use them unconsciously. Every interaction with a mirror should be a conscious act, a spiritual practice, an opportunity to remember your true nature rather than forget it. This is the Gnostic path, not rejection of matter but transcendence through gnosis, not escape from the world but liberation within it. Let me share one more profound teaching from the secret book of John that ties all of this together. In that text, there's a scene where John asks Jesus about the fate of souls who have awakened to gnosis versus those who remain asleep in material identification. Jesus explains that when a soul who has gnosis leaves the physical body at death, that soul ascends through the various levels of Archon control, and at each level the Archons try to stop it, try to convince it to return to incarnation, try to make it forget its divine nature. But the awakened soul has weapons that the sleeping soul does not have. The awakened soul knows the names of the Archons, knows their tricks, and most importantly knows that it is not bound by material reality. The awakened soul looks at the Archons and sees right through them, sees them as the empty reflections they truly are, and passes through each level without being trapped. The sleeping soul, on the other hand, doesn't recognize the Archons, doesn't see through their illusions, and gets convinced to return to physical incarnation over and over again, forgetting everything each time, trapped in an endless cycle. The mirror practice is preparation for this moment of liberation. Every time you look in a mirror and remember your divine nature, you're rehearsing for the moment when you'll leave your physical body and face the Archons directly. You're training yourself to see through illusions, to recognize reflections as reflections rather than reality, to maintain your center of conscious awareness no matter what images or forms appear before you. This isn't just spiritual philosophy. This is practical training for the most important journey your soul will ever take. The journey from material imprisonment back to the divine source in the pleroma. And here's the beautiful thing. You don't have to wait until death to experience this liberation. The Gnostic path teaches that awakening can happen right now, in this lifetime, in this body. When you achieve gnosis, when you truly remember who you are, you're no longer bound by the Archon system even while you're still inhabiting a physical form. You become what the Gnostics called a pneumatic, a spiritual being who walks through the material world but is not controlled by it, who sees through all the illusions but can still function within them, who has one foot in the physical realm and one foot in the divine realm simultaneously. This is the freedom that Jesus was offering, not salvation after death through belief in external authority, but liberation right now through direct knowledge of your true nature. So I want to invite you to make a commitment. For the next 30 days, commit to never looking in a mirror unconsciously. Every single time you need to use a mirror, pause first. Take 3 conscious breaths. Remember that you are eternal divine consciousness. Look at your reflection with this awareness active. Notice what shifts in your perception, in your energy, in your sense of self. Keep a journal of what you experience. Write down any insights, any visions, any moments of gnosis that arise. Share your experiences in the comment section of this video so that other seekers can be inspired and encouraged by your journey. This simple practice could be the catalyst that finally breaks through the veil of material illusion and awakens you to the truth of who you are. Before we close, let me give you one final piece of the puzzle that brings everything together. Jesus taught that the ultimate goal of the Gnostic path is not just individual liberation, but cosmic restoration. The divine Sophia, the wisdom of God, fell from the pleroma and became trapped in matter. And her fall is what created this entire material universe and allowed the demiurge and archons to gain power. Your divine spark, the consciousness within you, is actually a fragment of Sophia herself. When you awaken to gnosis, when you remember your true nature and break free from Archon control, you're not just liberating yourself, you're participating in the liberation of Sophia, in the restoration of divine wisdom to its rightful place in the pleroma. Every awakened soul is a piece of Sophia returning home. Every moment of gnosis is a crack in the prison walls of material reality. And every time you look in a mirror with conscious awareness and refuse to be bound by the reflection, you're striking a blow against the entire Archon system of control. You're part of a cosmic rebellion, a divine revolution, and your awakening matters infinitely more than you might realize. This knowledge that I've shared with you today is precious beyond measure. It's been suppressed for nearly 2,000 years because those in power, both in the material world and in the Archon realms, knew how dangerous it would be if people truly understood it. But you're here now. You've received it, and that means something. It means your soul is ready to wake up. It means you're being called to remember who you are. It means you're part of the final wave of awakening that's happening on this planet right now, as the Archon control system begins to crumble and more souls are breaking free. If you found this teaching valuable, if you feel that you've finally discovered a mentor who understands your spiritual hunger and is willing to share the deepest truths, do 3 things right now. First, Leave your like on this video so more seekers can find it. Second, write in the comments, "I reclaim my divine sovereignty." Let that be your public declaration of awakening. And third, share this video with anyone you know who is genuinely searching for truth, who feels trapped in material illusion, who needs to hear this message. Don't gatekeep this knowledge, let it spread like wildfire to everyone who is ready to receive it. Next week, I'm going to reveal the most shocking teaching from the Pistis Sophia about how the Archons use time itself as a prison, and how Jesus taught his disciples to escape the trap of linear time and access the eternal now, where all divine power exists. You're not going to want to miss that. Subscribe and activate the bell so you'll be notified the moment that video goes live. Remember, you are not alone on this path. Thousands of seekers around the world are waking up to these truths right now, and together we're building a community of modern Gnostics who support each other, who share knowledge, who encourage each other's liberation. Welcome to the journey. Welcome home. May the light of Sophia guide you always as you remember who you truly are and reclaim your freedom from the Archon prison of material illusion.